Daniel Foster signed the divorce papers in the break room of Carson Industries, while his wife Amanda handed him her lawyer's business card, telling him he was too poor to give her the life she deserved, and that she was marrying his rich boss, Gregory Carson, the CEO who made Daniel work 70-hour weeks for barely enough to cover rent. But what neither Amanda nor Gregory knew was that Daniel's estranged uncle, the tech billionaire he'd never mentioned, had died 3 weeks earlier and left Daniel his entire $450 million fortune, including a controlling stake in Carson Industries' parent company. Amanda married Gregory in a lavish ceremony 2 months later, flashing her new diamond and her new executive wife status around the office where Daniel had quietly resigned, completely unaware that Daniel had just bought the entire corporate chain that owned Carson Industries and was restructuring everything from the top down. Gregory got the memo about new ownership the same day Amanda posted their honeymoon photos from the Maldives, neither of them recognizing Daniel's name on the acquisition documents because he'd used his legal name, Daniel James Foster III, the same name listed as their new chairman of the board. What happens when a woman who divorced a man for being too poor discovers he's now worth $450 million and owns the company where her rich new husband works? What did Daniel do with that power that would leave Amanda so devastated she'd question every choice she'd made? And why would a betrayal built on money and status lead to a reckoning so complete that both Amanda and Gregory would lose everything they'd schemed to gain? Daniel sat in the sterile conference room of Whitmore and Associates, still wearing his warehouse supervisor uniform from Carson Industries, and tried to process the words coming from the silver-haired lawyer across the mahogany table. The letter had arrived at his apartment last month, the apartment Amanda had already moved out of, leaving behind only divorce papers and a note about needing more from life. He'd almost ignored the legal summons entirely, assuming it was another creditor, or maybe something related to the divorce. But the firm's name suggested old money, real money, the kind of lawyers Daniel had never imagined needing. Your uncle, James Foster, passed away on March 15th, Richard Whitmore said, sliding a folder across the table. You were estranged, I understand, but his will is explicit and legally ironclad. You are his sole living heir. Daniel stared at the name. James Foster, his mother's brother, the man who'd disappeared into Silicon Valley 40 years ago and never looked back. Daniel had met him exactly once, at his mother's funeral when Daniel was 19. James had stood at the back of the church, left an envelope with $5,000 and a business card, and vanished. Daniel had tried calling the number once, years ago, when his mother's medical bills were crushing him. The number was disconnected. He'd assumed his uncle wanted nothing to do with family. I don't understand, Daniel said quietly. My uncle and I weren't close. We barely knew each other. He knew you, Richard said, opening the folder. James Foster was a venture capitalist who made his fortune investing in early-stage technology companies. His estate is currently valued at $453 million. That includes a diversified investment portfolio, commercial real estate holdings, and significant equity positions in 17 corporations. The number made no sense. Daniel earned $42,000 a year managing inventory at a mid-sized manufacturing firm. His apartment cost $1,800 a month. He drove a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield. Amanda had just divorced him because he was, in her exact words, going nowhere and couldn't provide the lifestyle she deserved. This has to be a mistake, Daniel whispered. Richard pulled out a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. Your uncle left this for you. Perhaps it will provide clarity. Daniel's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. His uncle's handwriting was precise, almost architectural. Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably confused. I kept my distance deliberately. I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become without the corruption of easy money. I watched from afar, anonymously funding scholarships you never knew about, ensuring certain job opportunities came your way, observing how you handled adversity. Your mother told me before she died that you worked 3 jobs to pay her medical bills. You never complained. You never asked me for help, even though you had my card. That told me everything I needed to know. You have character, integrity, humility, the same qualities your mother had, the same qualities I abandoned when I got rich. I became someone who measured worth in dollars and used wealth as power. I hurt people, built companies on the backs of workers I undervalued. By the time I realized what I'd become, I had no real relationships left, no family except a nephew I'd ignored. I'm giving you everything I built with one hope, that you'll use it better than I did. Don't become me. Become who you already are, just with the resources to do it at scale. There's a reason I invested heavily in Carson Industries' parent company. I heard through connections how they treated their employees, how the CEO, Gregory Carson, exploited good people for profit. I couldn't fix it before I died, but you can. The paperwork is with Richard. You now own controlling interest in Apex Holdings, which owns Carson Industries and 6 other companies. You have the power to rebuild those organizations from the inside. Use it wisely. Make me proud. Make your mother proud. Uncle James Daniel read it 3 times. His uncle had been watching, had known about Carson Industries, had known about Gregory Carson, the man who just married Amanda. The inheritance transfers immediately, Richard said. However, your uncle's equity position in Apex Holdings requires strategic handling. You now own 51% of a multi-billion-dollar holding company. That makes you the chairman of the board. You'll need to decide how to exercise that authority. Daniel thought about Amanda, about the divorce papers she'd served him in the break room 3 months ago, while Gregory smirked from his corner office. About the years he'd spent working himself to exhaustion, while Gregory took credit for his ideas, and Amanda complained that he wasn't ambitious enough. About their wedding, which Gregory had attended as Daniel's supervisor, already planning how to steal his wife. He'd known. Looking back now, Daniel saw it clearly. The late meetings Amanda suddenly needed to attend with clients. The new clothes she bought despite their tight budget. The way Gregory had started giving Daniel the worst assignments, the most impossible deadlines, setting him up to fail. They'd been planning this for at least a year. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks ago. Amanda married Gregory 3 weeks after that in a ceremony that cost more than Daniel earned in 2 years. She'd posted photos on social media, the venue, the dress, the honeymoon in Maldives. Every image a declaration that she'd upgraded, traded up, found someone who could actually provide. What are my options? Daniel asked. Richard smiled slightly. You have several paths. You could remain a passive investor, collect dividends, and never involve yourself in operations. You could sell your position for significant profit. Or, he paused meaningfully, you could take an active role, restructure the companies, replace leadership, transform how these organizations operate. Replace leadership. Gregory Carson serves at the pleasure of Apex Holdings board. You control that board now. You could terminate him immediately, or, Richard's smile widened, you could do something more strategic. Something that serves the employees who've been mistreated while also exposing the kind of leadership that should never have been in power. Daniel thought about his uncle's letter, about not becoming bitter, about using power wisely, but also about justice, about consequences, about people like Gregory facing the results of how they treated others. I want to take an active role, Daniel said slowly, but I want to do it right. I want to understand everything about how these companies operate, who's been hurt by bad leadership, what needs to change. Can that happen quietly, without Gregory knowing who the new owner is? Absolutely. You'll be listed as Daniel James Foster III, which is your legal name, but not the name you use professionally. We can conduct a comprehensive audit of all Apex Holdings properties under the guise of routine new ownership review. By the time anyone realizes who you are, we'll have complete documentation of every operational failure, every HR violation, every abuse of authority. How long would that take? 90 days to do it properly. Daniel nodded. Then that's what we do. But I have one condition. I want the employees protected. Whatever changes happen, the people who've been working hard and getting exploited, they don't suffer. Only the people who created the toxic environment face consequences. Richard extended his hand. Your uncle chose well. Let's get started. Daniel spent the next 3 months living a double life. Publicly, he'd quit Carson Industries the week after his divorce was finalized, telling colleagues he needed a fresh start. No one questioned it. Amanda had made sure everyone knew she'd left him for someone better, and Gregory had spent years establishing Daniel as mediocre at best. His departure was treated as inevitable. Privately, Daniel worked with Richard and a team of corporate auditors, forensic accountants, and HR specialists to examine every aspect of Apex Holdings' subsidiaries. What they found was worse than he'd imagined. Carson Industries had a turnover rate of 60% annually because Gregory systematically overworked and underpaid employees while taking bonuses that exceeded the entire warehouse staff's combined salary. He'd been cited 7 times by OSHA for safety violations he'd ignored. 3 sexual harassment complaints had been buried by HR directors he'd personally hired. The company's profit margins looked healthy because Gregory cut every possible corner, delayed equipment maintenance, and threatened anyone who complained. The other 6 companies under Apex Holdings followed similar patterns. His uncle had invested in them years ago when they were well run, but over time, leadership had rotted from within. Good people suffered while executives extracted maximum profit without accountability. Daniel read every report, every complaint, every financial document. He met anonymously with employees who'd been fired for speaking up, workers who'd been injured because of safety violations, people whose careers had been destroyed by vindictive management. He listened to their stories and took notes, and he thought constantly about Amanda. About how she'd looked at him with contempt the day she'd asked for the divorce, sitting in their cheap apartment and telling him she couldn't do this anymore. She'd meant poverty, struggle, being married to someone who worked warehouse shifts instead of corner offices. Gregory can give me what you can't, she'd said. He has ambition. He has success. He doesn't come home smelling like cardboard and complaining about being tired. Daniel had been too shocked to argue. He'd signed the papers because he'd thought he loved her enough to let her go if she was unhappy. Now he understood. She'd never loved him at all. She'd loved the idea of him, the potential she'd imagined. And when he didn't transform into her fantasy fast enough, she'd traded him for someone who already had the exterior markers of success. Gregory had been worse. He'd attended their wedding, given a toast about friendship and loyalty, then spent the next 3 years systematically undermining Daniel at work while sleeping with his wife. The betrayal was calculated, deliberate, designed to maximize Daniel's humiliation. Richard called on day 89 of the audit. "We have everything we need. The documentation is overwhelming. Gregory Carson has violated company policy, federal labor law, and basic human decency repeatedly. Same with 4 other executives across the Apex portfolio. We can move forward." "What's the cleanest way to do this?" Daniel asked. "Board meeting. You attend as the new chairman, introduce yourself, present the findings, and make your recommendations. The board will vote, but since you control 51%, the outcome is predetermined. Carson and the others are terminated immediately, escorted from the premises, and barred from severance packages due to cause. Then you implement new leadership and restructuring plans." "When?" "How about Monday? Gregory just got back from a 2-week vacation in the Bahamas. Amanda posted photos yesterday." Daniel had seen them. Amanda in a bikini on a yacht, Gregory's arm around her waist, the caption reading, "Living our best life." 300 people had liked it. Dozens had commented about how perfect they looked together. "Monday works," Daniel said. Monday morning arrived with autumn rain. Daniel dressed carefully in a suit he'd bought specifically for this. Navy, expensive but not flashy, tailored perfectly. Richard had arranged everything. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Apex Holdings' downtown headquarters, ostensibly to introduce the new chairman and discuss strategic direction. Gregory had no idea he'd be there. None of the executives did. The agenda listed ownership transition planning and operational review. Standard corporate procedure. Daniel arrived 30 minutes early. The Apex building was glass and steel, 50 stories of corporate power. His uncle had maintained an office here, but rarely used it, preferring to work from home in his final years. That office was Daniel's now. Top floor, corner view, furnished with mid-century modern furniture and original artwork worth more than Daniel's entire previous life. Richard met him in the hallway. "Ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, you're the chairman. You own this. Gregory Carson is an employee who's failed in his duties. You're not confronting him personally. You're fulfilling your fiduciary responsibility to shareholders and workers. Daniel nodded. They entered the boardroom together. 12 people sat around the table. Board members his uncle had carefully selected over the years. Executives from the various subsidiaries occupied chairs along the wall. Gregory was among them, looking confident and expensive in a suit that probably cost $5,000. He was scrolling through his phone, bored, waiting for the meeting to start so he could perform his usual show of competence for the board. He didn't look up when Daniel entered. None of them did initially. They were waiting for the chairman, expecting someone they knew, someone from his uncle's generation. Richard cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. I'd like to introduce Daniel James Foster III, James Foster's nephew and heir, your new chairman of the board. The room went silent. Gregory's head snapped up. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something close to panic as he recognized Daniel standing at the head of the table. Good morning, Daniel said calmly. I appreciate you all being here. I know this transition has been unexpected, but I want to assure you that my uncle's vision for Apex Holdings will continue, with some significant modifications. Gregory half stood. Wait, you're Daniel Foster? From Carson Industries? You worked in my warehouse. I did, Daniel said evenly, until 3 months ago when my wife divorced me, married you, and I decided to reevaluate my career path. Please sit down, Mr. Carson. We have a lot to discuss. Gregory sat slowly, his face pale. Around the room, other executives were whispering, checking phones, trying to understand what was happening. Daniel opened his presentation. Over the past 90 days, I've conducted a comprehensive operational audit of all Apex Holdings subsidiaries. What I've found is deeply concerning. Several companies under our umbrella have systematically violated labor laws, ignored safety regulations, and created hostile work environments. This isn't just ethically wrong, it's a massive legal and financial liability. He clicked to the first slide. Carson Industries' violation record appeared in damning detail. Carson Industries has the worst record. Under Mr. Carson's leadership, the company has faced 7 OSHA citations, 3 buried sexual harassment complaints, and a turnover rate that costs us millions annually in training and lost productivity. Mr. Carson has personally received bonuses totaling $2.3 million over the past 3 years, while worker wages have remained stagnant and safety equipment requests have been denied. Gregory's face was red now. That's out of context. Those numbers don't reflect. They reflect exactly what happened, Daniel said quietly. I have documentation, testimony from 47 current and former employees, financial records showing you authorized your own bonuses while denying budget requests for equipment repairs that led to 3 worker injuries. Should I continue? The room was deadly silent. Daniel clicked through more slides. Each one was worse than the last. Specific incidents, specific failures, specific abuses of authority. He presented them factually, without emotion, letting the evidence speak. When he finished, he looked at Gregory directly. Mr. Carson, your employment with Carson Industries is terminated effective immediately for cause. You'll be escorted from the premises and will receive no severance package. The same applies to 4 other executives in this room whose violations are similarly documented. Richard stood, nodding to security personnel waiting outside. Gentlemen, please come with us. Gregory exploded. You can't do this. I built Carson Industries. Your uncle was a passive investor who... My uncle owned 51% of this company, and every decision you made was technically subject to his approval. You violated that trust repeatedly. Now you're facing the consequences. Security will escort you out. As Gregory was led from the room, sputtering threats about lawyers and lawsuits, Daniel felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. This was protecting the people Gregory had hurt and would continue to hurt if left in power. The other executives filed out. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. I know this is shocking, Daniel said, but I didn't come here to destroy these companies. I came to fix them. I have restructuring plans for each subsidiary that prioritize worker safety, fair compensation, and sustainable growth. I've identified internal candidates for promotion, people who've been doing the real work while others took credit. I want to build organizations my uncle would be proud of. Organizations that prove profit and ethics aren't mutually exclusive. The board voted unanimously to support his plan. Amanda found out 3 hours later, when Gregory called her from the parking lot, his voice shaking with rage. She didn't believe him at first. Then she saw the emergency email from Carson Industries announcing leadership changes. Then she saw the news. Business press was already covering the story. Mysterious heir overhauls manufacturing giant. New chairman fires CEO for labor violations. Her phone rang. Daniel's number. She answered without thinking. Hello, Amanda. His voice was different, calmer, confident, like he'd become someone else entirely. Daniel, what the hell did you just do? I did my job. As chairman of Apex Holdings, I'm responsible for ensuring our companies operate ethically and legally. Gregory failed on both counts. He's been terminated. You can't just, you worked for him. You were nothing. How do you suddenly own the company? I inherited it from my uncle. The same uncle you told me was probably a con artist who abandoned his family. Turns out he was worth $450 million and he left everything to me, including the company where you convinced me I was a failure. The silence on Amanda's end was profound. That's not possible, she whispered finally. It's very possible. It's done. Gregory is unemployed. Given his termination for cause, he'll have difficulty finding comparable employment. Most companies do thorough reference checks, and his record is now complicated. You did this because I left you. This is revenge. No, Daniel said, and he meant it. I did this because Gregory was a bad leader who hurt people. You left me because I was poor and you wanted more. That was your choice. Gregory betrayed me personally, but he also created a toxic workplace that harmed dozens of people who depended on him for their livelihoods. That's what I'm addressing. Your marriage to him is irrelevant to my decisions as chairman. Irrelevant? You're destroying his career. I'm holding him accountable for his actions. There's a difference. The documentation is extensive. If you don't believe me, I can have Richard send you copies of the audit. 7 OSHA violations, Amanda. 3 sexual harassment complaints he buried. Workers injured because he wouldn't approve safety equipment repairs while taking million-dollar bonuses. Is that the man you thought you were marrying? Another long silence. I didn't know, she said quietly. You didn't ask. You saw the salary, the title, the lifestyle. You didn't care how he built it or who he hurt building it. Just like you didn't care that I was working myself to exhaustion trying to provide while you complained I wasn't enough. That's not fair, isn't it? You told me I was too poor. Those were your exact words when you asked for the divorce. Too poor to give me the life I deserve. Did you know I worked 3 jobs to pay my mother's medical bills? That I was exhausted all the time, not because I lacked ambition, but because I was honoring the one person who actually loved me unconditionally? You saw that sacrifice as failure, as weakness. Daniel, I'm not angry, Amanda. I'm just clear now. You married Gregory for money and status. Now he has neither. That's not my problem to solve. But I want you to understand something. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because it was right. The fact that it affects you is collateral. Not intentional. He hung up. Amanda stood in the kitchen of her new house, Gregory's house, the one that came with his executive position, and felt the foundation of her new life crumbling. Gregory was screaming in the next room, talking to lawyers, making threats. But she'd heard Daniel's voice, heard the calm certainty in it, and she knew. She'd made a catastrophic mistake. She'd left the man who would have moved mountains for her in favor of someone who'd used people as stepping stones. And now the man she'd abandoned was the one with all the power, and the man she'd chosen had nothing. The next 3 months were brutal for Gregory and Amanda. Gregory's termination made industry news. His employment history was scrutinized. The buried harassment complaints resurfaced. Companies that might have hired him backed away. His severance package, which he'd been counting on, never materialized because he'd been fired for cause. His lawyer explained that the documentation Daniel had compiled was airtight. Fighting it would be expensive, public, and futile. Amanda watched her new marriage implode under financial pressure, the house they couldn't afford without Gregory's income, the lifestyle they'd been flaunting. Gregory became bitter, angry, blaming everyone but himself. He blamed Daniel for being vindictive. He blamed the workers who testified against him for being disloyal. He blamed Amanda for not being supportive enough. She tried. She really did. She got a job, something she hadn't done in years because Gregory had wanted a wife who could attend events and look good at dinners. But her resume was thin, her skills dated, and the positions she qualified for paid barely above minimum wage. They fought constantly about money, about blame, about the future they'd planned that was evaporating. Gregory started drinking, started talking about how everything had been perfect until Daniel got lucky with some inheritance. "It's not fair," he'd mutter. "I worked for everything I had. He just inherited it. He didn't earn anything." Amanda stopped responding. She'd started seeing things differently, started remembering Daniel working night shifts and never complaining, coming home exhausted but still making time to help her with projects, to listen to her day, to be present. She'd called that weakness, called it lack of ambition. Now she saw it was love, sacrifice, character, and she'd thrown it away for appearance, for status. For a man who was only impressive on the surface. 6 months after Daniel had taken over Apex Holdings, Amanda saw him at a charity gala. She almost didn't recognize him, not because he'd changed dramatically, but because he carried himself differently. Confident but not arrogant, wealthy but not flashy. He was talking with a woman about halfway through renovating an affordable housing complex that Apex was funding. Their eyes met across the room. Daniel nodded politely and turned back to his conversation. Amanda felt devastated, not because he was cruel, but because he was indifferent. She didn't register. She didn't matter. She was just someone he used to know, someone who'd revealed her character and been found wanting. She left early. Gregory was at home, unemployed, bitter, drinking. She filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Daniel heard about Amanda's second divorce through the industry grapevine. He felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a distant sadness for time wasted and potential never realized. He was too busy building. Carson Industries had been restructured completely. New leadership promoted from within. People who'd been doing the real work all along. Safety equipment upgraded. Wages increased. Turnover dropped to 15%. Productivity actually improved because people felt valued, protected, invested in. The model worked so well that Daniel implemented it across all Apex Holdings subsidiaries. Profits dipped slightly at first as he invested in people and equipment. But within a year, every company was performing better than under the old leadership. Turns out treating workers well and prioritizing safety wasn't just ethical, it was good business. Daniel started the James Foster Foundation with $100 million dedicated to supporting workers' rights organizations, job training programs, and legal aid for employees facing workplace abuse. His uncle's letter had been clear: use wealth to help people who needed opportunities. Daniel was doing exactly that. Richard called one afternoon. Amanda requested a meeting, said she wanted to apologize. Should I tell her no? Daniel thought about it. Tell her I'll meet her, but not privately, at the foundation office during business hours. They met 2 weeks later. Amanda looked smaller somehow, older, tired. She sat across from Daniel's desk, his uncle's desk, now his, and struggled to find words. "Thank you for seeing me," she said finally. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, for what I said, for," her voice cracked, "for not seeing who you were." Daniel nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I needed you to know that I realize now what I threw away. You were kind and loyal and good, and I was shallow and selfish and stupid." "You weren't stupid," Daniel said quietly. "You were human. You wanted security, comfort, a certain kind of life. That's not wrong. Where you went wrong was hurting someone who loved you to get those things, and choosing someone who'd built his success by hurting others. Gregory and I are divorced. I heard. I'm working retail now, living in a studio apartment. Starting over." She looked at him hopefully. "I know I don't deserve it, but is there any chance we could try again? I understand now what matters. I've grown. I've changed." Daniel looked at her carefully. He saw the sincerity. He also saw the calculation behind it. She'd grown, yes, but she'd grown because she'd lost everything, not because she genuinely transformed. No, he said gently. I'm glad you've had time to reflect, and I genuinely hope you build a good life. But what we had is gone, and I don't think it was ever what either of us needed. You wanted someone I wasn't, and I wanted someone you couldn't be. Her face crumpled. Because I'm not rich enough now? Is that it? Now that you're wealthy, I'm not good enough? No, because you showed me who you were when I had nothing, and people don't fundamentally change that way. You left when I needed support. You chose status over partnership. Those aren't mistakes, Amanda. Those are values, and your values don't align with mine. She stood abruptly. So you're just going to stay alone? Stay bitter? I'm not bitter. I'm building something meaningful with my life. I'm helping people, running companies ethically, trying to live up to my uncle's hopes and my mother's values. I'm not alone. I have work I believe in and people who share my vision. That's enough. Amanda left without another word. 2 years later, Daniel had transformed Apex Holdings into a model of ethical corporate leadership. The companies thrived. Workers stayed. Safety records were flawless. Profits were strong. He'd been profiled in business magazines as part of a new generation of wealth focused on stakeholder value over shareholder extraction. He dated occasionally, but never seriously. He was genuinely happy, genuinely fulfilled by the work. He'd found purpose his uncle had been searching for and never found. Richard called one morning with news. Gregory Carson is declaring bankruptcy. Lost everything. His lawyer contacted me asking if you'd consider hiring him in some capacity. Apparently no one else will. Daniel thought about it, about his uncle's letter, about becoming bitter versus staying human. Tell him we have an opening in our worker safety compliance department. Entry level, $45,000 a year. If he wants it, he needs to apply formally, interview with HR, and start at the bottom like everyone else. No special treatment. But if he's genuinely interested in learning how to do things right, there's a place for him. You're serious? My uncle told me not to become him, someone who used wealth as a weapon. Gregory needs to face consequences for his actions, but he also needs a chance to rebuild if he's willing to do the work. That's not weakness. That's integrity. Gregory took the job. He showed up every day, kept his head down, and learned what it meant to prioritize people over profit. He'd never be management again, but he became decent at compliance work, humbled, human. Amanda heard about it through mutual acquaintances. She'd rebuilt her life too, remarried eventually to someone kind, someone steady, someone with values instead of just wealth. She was happier, though she'd never stop regretting what she'd lost. Daniel saw her once more, years later, at a community event. They nodded to each other, no hostility, no longing, just two people who'd once been married and had both found better paths alone. She looked at him with sadness and acceptance. He looked at her with peace and grace, and that somehow was the most devastating consequence of all. Not that he'd punished her, but that he'd moved so far beyond her that punishment wasn't even relevant. He'd become someone she could never reach again. Not because of money, but because of character, and she'd have to live with that truth for the rest of her life.